well. Jackson James is a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund in Washington, and he told me more about the potential impact of Germany's regional elections. What are you anticipating from these regional elections?
I think basically we're going to see protests, and the protests are going to take the form of two parties. One is the AfD and the other is the BSW. They will show up on the screen in a way that they've never showed up before. And I think the other thing that we will see is the political parties that are represented in the government in Berlin will take a thrashing. And that may have implications for next year's election.
I want to talk a little bit more about the implications and just read you a quote that we had from Alice Weidel today, one of the party leaders of the AfD. And she said Germany needs controlled borders again and the robust expulsion of illegal migrants. She said, I demand the immediate expulsion of all illegal immigrants from our country, all criminals, all extremists. They must leave our country. I mean, realistically, what impact could the AfD, for example, as one of those parties mentioned, end up having on policy? Well,
first of all, I think it's probable and likely that they will not be in the governing coalition of either Thuringia or Saxony, or for that matter, Brandenburg in 3 weeks. So in that respect, they will be opposition parties in those states. The problem will be that there's the other party, BSW, who's pushing us on the same button, and she may well be in one of these two coalitions. And so there will be more noise and there will be more pressure on Scholz and his coalition to respond, but I don't think they're going to be doing that in a way that's going to round up people and send them off. I think it's just going to be more of a discussion about what we can do, and it will be a little bit more harsher.
I mean, you were talking there about that noise, and we may only be talking about a handful of states, but of course I just wonder to what extent that could end up having an influence over the conversation, the discussion, even the rhetoric in other parts of the country as well, if we do see that relative success of the AfD and the far left party in these elections.
I don't think there's any question about that. And the parties that will be in competition with each other next year, Mr. Scholz obviously trying to get reelected with his coalition, if that coalition holds between now and then, or the CDU, which will be the opposition party vying for that job. And both of them are going to have this problem squarely on top of their agendas.
I mean, how did we get here? I mean, of course, there is that frustration, I think it's fair to say, from many parts of society with Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his coalition. Do you think that there's anything he could have done, or do you think that there is anything that he will do to try and allay some of these concerns? I mean, you mentioned, of course, the federal elections as well next year, and one will imagine he will have an eye keenly on that.
Well, he'll have to, and he'll have to be saying, not only talking about it, but doing something about it. And the question is what? There are many people that are saying simply that this is going to be a problem not only for exactly one country or another country, it's going to be all over Europe. And so I think one of the problems that Germany's going to have is working out the arrangements not only within the country itself, but working within the EU. And they're talking about that as well. So he's going to have to respond to this in no uncertain terms. The question is with what capabilities and in a coalition that is not exactly synergistic.
I mean, talking a little bit more about some of the root causes, I mean, something that is interesting is if you look at the former East German states, for example, and you've got the AfD with its anti-immigration platform,
right,
anti-migrant. But if you take a look at some of those patterns of migration, the East doesn't always tend to see quite the same levels of immigration, in fact. So
that's right.
So just tell us a little bit more then about how these messages have managed to take hold.
Well, I mean, basically, think about it this way. The western part of Germany is a lot more heterogeneous in its makeup, and that goes back well before unification. But it's gotten more so over the last 20, 30 years. That's not the case in East Germany. And so there is a different modification of the way they think they should be getting the stuff from the state, who is not getting it, and why is somebody else getting it who is perhaps just an asylum seeker who shouldn't be here to begin with. That kind of protest, that kind of grievance is much more pronounced in the East for reasons that go all the way back to 1990 and the long road to unification, which is still going on to this day. So I think that this is going to be a regional problem, but it's also going to be a problem for all of Germany to cope with. And again, I'm going to just stress the fact that I think they're going to have to do it not only within the context of their own borders, but they're going to have to think about it within a European context.
Something perhaps we should point out is we're having this conversation here in the United States about Germany, but I just wonder to what extent you think that what we're seeing in Germany is actually emblematic of things that we've seen in other countries, the rise of populism, including here in the United States.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is a mirror image of some of the same grievances, the same problems, the same people that are saying we're not getting our share of the pie in our country. And why am I uncomfortable with all of these other people that are here with me? I think that's something that's all over Europe, and it's certainly in the United States. And people recognize that and feel it. And I think that to some extent it's a challenge for almost every coalition government in not only in Germany, in Europe, but also certainly here.